I'm Critical Cripple, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
Yes, religious leaders are human and make mistakes, but what I can't figure out is why the hypocrisy of the archetypal disgraced evangelist is so widespread. The very pillars of religious communities, the very examples for their followers to emulate, seem to be exponentially more likely to be involved in scandal than the population at large. Peter Youngren had an extramarital affair in 2002 with a woman in his congregation, resulting in an illegitimate child. He left his position as founding president of Open Faith Bible Fellowship and was stripped of all ministry credentials. This is a very modest example, and it wouldn't be that big of an issue if it weren't for the fact that this type of activity among evangelists is as common as cat shit and twice as nasty. That is a quote from the Concise New Partridge Dictionary of Slang and Unconventional English.
Gross. Yeah, I think it makes sense that people in these communities would be more predatory because you have so much extra power and influence over other people when you preach religious things. And again, somebody who has this basic faith foundation is more likely to believe something like this. And so you manipulate that faith that they have in you, and you can get away with a lot of things that somebody that's just like the founder of a business wouldn't get away with, because you have this extra layer of like credibility and trustworthiness that, you know, if you're a man of God, then people are much more likely to trust you. And if you are a mouthpiece of God, then people will follow you and worship you as if you're a deity on your own. So that's, it's a very powerful position, and it creates a lot of influence, and it cuts a lot of shortcuts with con men needing to like gain your trust. But also the level of like adoration and worship that like cult leaders will get, or preachers and stuff, like they feel really good about themselves, and so if you're like a narcissist, you have a need for that kind of praise, and so they're more likely to get the things that they like to get, but also have a lot more power and influence over other people.
What I think is interesting, specifically, is where it's talking about the hypocrisy of archetypal disgraced evangelists and why it's so widespread. I think that's simply because it works. It is a proven system.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you are a con man, or you are legitimately someone who started out on what you might consider the noble path and was taken in by the fame and success, I mean, you're still, you know, using this system that allows you to climb on the backs of other people for your, you know, for your own personal gain. And it is really interesting.
And for your self-esteem.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It is really interesting that people don't see themselves as being taken in. But I think it's because we all have a tendency to think that we are more in the know or smarter than we actually are.
Yeah.
And it's also just nice that sometimes to have someone have the answers for you.
Yes, there's a lot of comfort in that.
There's so much comfort in that. I've always struggled with that. So like I went to church a little bit when I was younger, but not until I was really like maybe like 8 to 11. So I wasn't already brought into that system, but it made me very uncomfortable because I didn't understand a lot of what was coming out from the people speaking to me. I didn't have a frame of reference because I wasn't, you know, raised in it to where subconsciously I just felt like this must be true. I was already questioning it as soon as I heard it. And but there are a lot of people who don't have that opportunity, sadly.
Yeah.
And, there's also what we've learned, a genetic component to, how easily we group think and accept things and want to be part of a group and all that. So it's a very complex situation, but definitely this system works. And I think the best thing we can do is point out how these people are functioning and how they're using their money and showing the life that they're living versus the people that they're preaching to. Because you have people who are, flying around in these personal jets. You have people who are have major tax evasion and fraud. People that are buying themselves houses. I know there's one particular interview on YouTube that about a man who is being investigated by the IRS over all of this stuff, all of this tax fraud. And it's really sad.
And a lot of the money they get is tax-free and it's tax deductible when people give it. So it's just
it's that much easier to just let it not see where it's going.
And your money goes a lot further when it's not being taxed like that, like any other business or any other charitable organization.
So definitely point out, anytime you see someone who is one of these, huge evangelists, point out to others, where are they getting this money? What are they really using it for? Who is it really benefiting?
Yeah. Well, and that's good, that's for evangelicals, but it's also the Catholic Church, because people wonder why the Catholic Church is being criticized so much for the, pedophilia and all of these crimes against humanity, really. And they're like, oh, well, it's just like any other organization. But not only is this organization not being held accountable by society the way that any other normal organization would be because of that religious connotation that they have, but again, you have these protections that are put in place for people who are predatory to be more likely to join them and to have access to children and access to extortion and money and, the raping of nuns and the raping of all kinds of other people. So it is not exclusive to children, unfortunately, but it's also, it makes sense that people would flock to these things for those purposes because they provide very unique protection to them and access to them, because it's you have this automatic trust that's given. And that creates trauma for people who are victims of that is much more complex trauma than what you would find in any other type. So it's the same, if you're the victim of that kind of abuse in a religious context, it can be felt as the same type of trauma as sexual abuse by a parent. So it's that type of very deep, complex trauma that people really never get over. So it's very, very damaging, but it's also, unfortunately, it makes sense why it's more common there.
I think maybe my advice and something we've been doing is find ways to donate to your community personally, or through, more trusted, vetted secular sources than necessarily a religious community. Unless you are hands-on and you know exactly where that money is going and where it's being used.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Dahmer raped and killed 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. He then had sex with their corpses, dismembered them, ate them, and dissolved the leftovers in acid. While in prison, he devoted himself to Christianity and became a born-again Christian. Say hello to him in heaven. Christianity is not about who deserves to be in heaven or who should be in heaven. It's not about your acts or your deeds. You can be a genuinely awful person, and if God chooses you to be saved and provides you with salvation by grace through faith, etc., then you just get to go to heaven, which means this is the argument for what Jeffrey Dahmer has supposedly done, which was to live a life as a terrible human being, and then when caught, repent and seek salvation. Whether or not he genuinely was sorry, I don't know. Whether or not there's a heaven to go to, I don't know. But if the criteria for getting into heaven is such that I'm likely to find myself standing next to Jeffrey Dahmer, God's got some splaining to do.
A quick history of the Quran. Muhammad was born around 570 Common Era. His father, Abdullah, was a caravan merchant and died sometime around Muhammad's birth. That sucks. Muhammad married his first of many wives, Kajuda. I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing that. When he was 25 and she was 40. Wow. He liked to chase the cougars. They had 6 kids. His two only sons died young. Again, that sucks. Muhammad found and entered a cave on Mount Nur. I mean, honestly, in the Middle East, is it really that unusual to find a cave? In his cave, during the originally pagan holiday of Ramadan, the angel Gabriel began reciting the Quran to Muhammad. So Gabriel just appeared out of nowhere. This is Gabriel, happy gnome, and he just begins reciting this stuff into Muhammad's ear. Depending on the ear, that could be defined as schizophrenia. But Muhammad was illiterate, so he obviously wasn't writing this down, so he had to memorize the entire book. 3 years later, the religion began to spread, and the wars. If he was illiterate, who wrote the shit down? Does no one ask these questions? I call bullshit.
Our reporter Keith Collins joins us now live from the scene of the bullshit. We have a colorful graphic here that shows instances of bullshit like this are on the rise. Is that right?
Yes, although why is unclear. Some say it's because of one fucking reason. Others say it's because of some other fucking reason.
God violently drowned humankind because they were violent. The room is spinning from all the irony. Christians like to tell me that God killed humankind because they were sacrificing babies to their gods. My response is, the people killed a few babies, so God's punishment is to kill all the babies. How does that make sense?
Westboro Baptist Church got it all wrong. God hates figs. Jesus got hungry one day while walking along a road outside Bethany. He noticed a fig tree in the distance. Knowing ahead of time that figs weren't currently in season, he approached the tree anyway. Sure as shit, no figs. In his anger, Jesus said, "If I can't have figs from this tree, no one will." He then cursed the tree and it instantly began to wither. Of course, being omniscient, Jesus should have known that that particular fig tree didn't have fruit on it before he even walked over, but still. Doing a quick Google search, I found as many interpretations of the fig interlude as there are apologists and hermeneuticists. To make an extremely long story short, any interpreter of this passage is going to have to undergo the mental contortions necessary to make this passage come out as righteous and consistent with morality. What they start out realizing is that any conclusion must show JC as anything but being hangry and petty. Instead, their interpretation has to try to tie the passage back to faith bringing forth fruit. Or, if you are not faithful, you will wither and die. Or, I am thy God. How dare you disappoint me with your lack of fruit/faith? Damn you to oblivion. But buck up. At least it's better than burning in agony in hell forever, like I have in store for humans without faith. With verses like this, I always wonder why, when the presumed Bible scholars came up with which books and passages would be included in the Holy Bible, both Old and New Testaments, and which ones would be left out, they decided to leave the fig interlude in. But at the same time, they leave any mention of renouncing slavery, genocide, the inequality of women. Their priorities seem a little out of whack. Of course, I'd be willing to bet real money that not a single one of these Bible scholars were slaves or former slaves, women, or part of any non-Judeo-Christian sect. Still, if JC does it, it must somehow be okay. The argument from authority.
Yahweh once told the son of a prophet to go get himself killed. The man approached his neighbors and asked him if he wouldn't mind cutting him down. The neighbor refused. This really enraged Yahweh, so he sent a lion to tear the neighbor apart. You'll find this in 1 Kings 20, verse 35.
2 years after the defeat of the Axis forces, a top-secret report surfaced which accused the Catholic Church of smuggling Nazi gold through the Vatican Bank to Spain and South America. The report mysteriously disappeared until 1997, when it was declassified by the U.S. government and released to the public. Lawsuits of up to $200 million are still ongoing. One of my favorite notes about the Catholic Church and its massive riches can be attributed to Sarah Silverman, where she suggested that we should bankrupt the Catholic Church and sell off its property, and perhaps turn all of those churches into homeless shelters and use the sale of the art and everything else about the Catholic Church to help feed and clothe the homeless, and to give the money to the victims of the Catholic Church's ongoing, continual criminal enterprises of hiding people who have abused children from legal consequences.